Hey guys, welcome entrepreneurs, artists, and creators. This is Dave with Founder Dojo. Hey, I had a conversation recently with a friend from my network who was asking me kind of like what we're doing at the studio and like how I'm building startups in general. And I want to give a little bit of context for that because I've been doing this for a while, 25 years or so, and I've created about 11 startups, depending how you count it, maybe more. Um, so there is a method to my madness, and I want to just very briefly describe what the method is. Okay, and you can learn this method, by the way, at founderdojo.com. That's where I mentor and teach other founders who are interested in building successful startups. So you could benefit from all my years' experience and all my successes and failures and everything in between if you go to founderdojo.com and sign up. Okay, let's get into it. So here's kind of the trick to building a successful startup. When you initially have an idea for a business, it kind of gets into your physical mind and you start mulling it over, and you get to the point where you think this was a good idea, like, hey, what if we did this, or what if we solved this problem in this way, and you start thinking, hey, this might be a good idea. But at that point, you don't really know for sure. You just kind of think it is, but you don't have enough data. You haven't talked to any customers, you haven't tried to sell it, you haven't tried to build it, you haven't tried to do anything, so you're very much just thinking like, I wonder if this would work. And at that point, your startup obviously is not going to manifest because you have doubt. You have doubt around whether this thing is going to work or not. So the whole purpose in investigating a startup idea and starting to build it is to move from thinking to knowing. Now, when you get into a place of knowing, that is when your business will manifest. And by the way, if you want to get into more metaphysical discussion, that's when anything will manifest, is when you've removed doubt and you know that it's already done. So you want to go from thinking to knowing. Thinking to knowing. That is the trick. And I don't mean like faking or lying to yourself or faking it until you make it. I mean knowing, like you are 100% certain. You feel it in your bones, and you just know that it'll work as if it's already done, as if you're already experiencing it. So the question is, how do you go from thinking to knowing, right? This journey, I mean, you may not get there. You may start looking at something and realize, this isn't going to work because of X, Y, Z, right? Or you may get there because as you navigate through that journey, you discover that, yeah, there's a clear path. So I developed a method for this that I use myself, and it came after I had done 5 startups. I started to see the pattern, and then I started teaching other people this process, which helped crystallize the method for me. And now I use this with all my startups. We use this method at Insight Studios to build startups that we originate. And I also teach this method, as I said before, at Founder Dojo. Okay, so let's get into it. So to go from thinking to knowing, I created this validation process, and I'm showing it here in a form of a validation wheel. So let me just describe briefly what this is. In the center of the wheel, you have this very important word called customer. So it's super critical in any startup venture for you to define who is the customer. And usually when you start, that customer definition is very broad. Like, I want to serve everyone who has a smartphone. Or I want to serve everyone who rides an Uber, or whatever it is. And the reason you start broad is you don't know any better. You don't know what the subsegments are. And there are always subsegments. There are groups within that broader customer range where they have specific needs or specific requirements, or they meet certain profile. And those types of customers are going to respond differently, and oftentimes they'll need different solutions. So, but you don't know that when you're starting. But as you go and you learn, you want to always update this customer, and you want to be asking yourself, Who are the early adopters? Okay, so whatever your current level of understanding is, you put that in the middle, customer. And then you go through the validation process, and you could actually do this in different order. But what I typically do is I start with problem validation. So those are shown in red. And then solution validation steps are shown in blue. And the path to customers steps are shown in green. So let's just keep this at a high level. The reason you go through this process is these are the things that have to be true in order for your startup to work. So, for example, problem. In order for your customer to buy and pay for your product or service or whatever it is, it has to solve a problem that they care about, right? They're going to part with their hard-earned money, and in order for them to do that, it has to solve a problem or meet a need. There has to be a value proposition, right? There has to be a reason that the customer is going to do it. And unfortunately, the reason is not that you're charming, that you work hard, that you're sincere. None of that really matters. When you ask the customer to separate themselves from some of their money, they're going to want to know, does this make sense for me? How does this make sense? What problem does it solve? What need does it meet? And so there's two different steps. And in this video, we're not going to get into the detailed steps. This is just going to keep this kind of high level. So you have a customer now in the middle. You have a customer that has a problem. But you need to make sure that that problem is important, that it's painful, that it costs them time, money, inconvenience, something. And you have to understand the relationship that that customer has with that problem. And that problem has to be high priority. If you focus on a problem that is like number 67 on the list of problems that this customer has, you're not going to get any traction because it's too low of a priority. So this has to be a high priority problem. And how do you know which customers have this problem and which subsegments of the customer universe have this problem and what precisely is the problem? All that stuff, initially you don't have the specifics on that. You just have kind of a notion or an idea a lot of times. Or maybe you do have a specific thing in mind because you experienced it, but you don't know how many other customers have that and what they look like. So that's step one. What problem are you solving and who you're solving it for? Once you have clarity on that and you move from thinking to knowing, and you do that by running experiments with customers, by interviewing them, etc., you're collecting data. You're collecting qualitative and quantitative data from those experiments, and that data gets you from thinking to knowing. You're like, hey, how do I know that customers care about this? Well, I just talked to 10 of them, and 7 of them broke down crying during the conversation. Like, that's an extreme example, but that's data, right? That's data that customers care about this. Okay, so that's problem validation. Number 2, once you have a problem, then you step back and you say, okay, what's the most elegant way to solve the solution? And let's forget about the solution maybe that we want to build. Let's forget about the solution maybe that was the original idea. We don't want to just build a product for sake of building a product, because if you do that, you end up building products that nobody wants. And I see engineers do this often. They come at it from a technical point of view, and they're really solving a technical problem. But at the end of the day, customers just don't care. What they care about is the outcome, right? And so you want to just take a clean sheet of paper and say, okay, if I just wanted to solve this problem for this customer in the most efficient, elegant way, how would I do it? And maybe that solution involves technology, and maybe it doesn't, right? So you want to be open-minded and not attached to any particular way of solving it. And of course, when you do that, you come up with some ideas, and you define the MVP, minimum viable product. Now, before you build that product, which is what a lot of people do, I like to just test the waters with that product. So a lot of times I'll create screenshots if it's a software product. Here are the screens. This is what it looks like. This is what it'll do. And it doesn't work, right? It's just an imaginary screenshot. It's not a real product, but it's enough to communicate to the customer what the heck this thing is. And then I take it to them and run different experiments with them to see if this resonates, right? How does it work? How does it not work? How excited are them? What I'm trying to figure out is like, do they care? Like, do they really want this thing, or do they kind of like, or do they just not want it at all, and they're just being polite, right? So that's solution validation. All those iterations. There's multiple steps to that process. Again, I don't want to get into the details, but once you achieve that, this is what Mark Andreessen calls, and most of the industry now calls, product market fit. So product market fit is you have a product and you have a market that wants it. And by market, all that is a group of customers, right? Group of customers that are defined as a certain segment profile problem that they need to solve. Okay, so you put the green and the blue together and you have product market fit. So this is where 90% of startups fail. They can't get to this point. So this is super critical. This is mission critical. If you cannot find product market fit, your startup will not be successful. There's just no way around it. And so there's a lot of work here. And a lot of younger entrepreneurs, less experienced entrepreneurs, they talk to a couple customers in fact, I just had this example the other day. This very nice entrepreneur, she was a first timer. She's like, I've got customers all lined up. I've talked to these customers and they all are like very positive. And I'm like, that's great. But, have you sold them something? Like, are they paying anything? Well, no, they're not paying anything because we don't have a product. Oh, we don't have a product yet. So you haven't presented them with a product. You haven't asked them to pay, right? So how do you know that you have product market fit? You have no customers. You have no product. These are conditions, minimum conditions that you would need to have to achieve product market fit. I mean, you need to have a product. You need to have customers that are paying for it. And so she doesn't have that. She doesn't have product market fit. She doesn't have anything. She has an idea. She's thinking and she's not knowing, or she might be knowing in her mind, but it's delusional because she doesn't really have any evidence to back that up. Okay, product market fit. And then the third piece is path to customers, okay? And this is what a lot of people call go-to-market. I like path to customers because that's the way I think about it. Like, what is my most efficient way to get to these customers, these early adopters that I want to do business with, and I want to help them and solve their problem? So the question is, where do they hang out? Are these customers hanging out in a certain place, online or offline or whatever? And then how do I get to them? How do I get into their world to make them aware that we have a solution to their problem? That's essentially what I'm looking for. And then that turns into a marketing or customer acquisition channel of some kind. And then that channel has a certain cost associated with it. And then you want to make sure the cost matches the value in terms of how much these customers are worth to you. So we look at metrics like lifetime value to CAC ratio, and that tells us how efficiently we can grow and scale this business. Okay, so when you put all this stuff together, problem validation, solution validation, and path to customers, when everything lines up around a given customer segment, you now have a scalable, repeatable business model. And once you have this, man, now you can fucking rock, because you can pour money into this thing and you can put $1 in and get $20 back. Okay, so this is the game. This is the game, is figuring this out. So this is how you go from thinking to knowing. Now, the steps to do that, obviously, I have it outlined here. We have a whole course on this called the Founder Transformation Course on founderdojo.com that you can check out. And this is the process we use in Insight Studios. And essentially, it's a sorting process. Not every idea that you have is going to achieve a scalable, repeatable business model, right? Not every idea is going to be a home run. So we use this process as a filtering, a vetting mechanism to separate the really good ideas that can become profitable, scalable businesses and the ones who cannot. And I don't view that in terms of success and failure, because I think it's a success when you find an idea that you can't turn into a profitable business. I know it's disappointing, but actually that's a success. And if you can find that out by spending just a little bit of money or even no money, that's a huge win. That is a successful discovery process. So I think of it in terms of just red lights and green lights. we're sorting out these ideas, these business models in terms of red lights and green lights. The red lights are the ones that probably can't achieve product market fit, or definitely can't based on our experiments, or probably can't become scalable, profitable businesses, or we know they definitely can't, or we can't see it right now. We can't see the path. Those are red lights. Red lights, just like a traffic light. The green lights are the ones where we can see that. We have lined it up. We can see a path for these to become profitable, scalable businesses. And so that's the game. And that's all we do. And over time, you get really good at this, and you're really good at separating the red from the green. And when you do that, you are unstoppable. Okay, let me know if that's helpful. If you guys have any questions or want to reach me directly, you can check me out on founderdojo.com, or you can DM me on whatever platform you're watching this. All right, thanks so much,